So why don't we go ahead and get started? Dina, do you want to introduce everybody, everything, the lecture series?
Sure. Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dina Hijazi, psychologist at D2 Counseling. I'm one of the founders. Most of you have probably know that. I'm recognizing a lot of names from the lecture series, so I appreciate you all being here month after month. D2 Counseling is a group of experienced therapists that work with folks from ages 3 to 93. We haven't had a 94-year-old yet. I'm sure we will. And we do a variety, we offer a variety of services. So we do individual, group, family, marriage, and teens and children. This lecture series is something that is very dear to our hearts. We were involved with it when it first came to be. It was run by the Meadows, and probably most of you, or I don't know, some of you know from the Meadows years ago. And Daniel and I actually met at the lecture series and then started giving talks together there. And then when they stepped out of this, we said that we wanted to continue the tradition of offering free CEUs and free speakers from our community, great therapists that could offer really practical, hands-on lectures for both therapists and just members of the community. So we're thrilled today to have Steve, but before we introduce him, Daniel, do you want to just say a little bit about the CEU part?
Sure. We offer CEUs for any clinicians who'd like can utilize those. And all you have to do is shoot us an email following the lecture, and we can get that to you. I'll post in the chat the email that you can send for, and we're happy to provide CEUs for everybody.
You want to introduce Steve?
So I was trying to think if I have any good stories. Well, anyway, Steve Kelly is one of my favorite people. Steve and I met when he asked me to cover him when he was working over at Karen, and he would play hooky from work and ask me to cover him at work for him, and I'd cover a shift for him every now and then. And he's one of my favorite people. I do regret that we don't get to spend more time with each other, but he is one of my favorite people, and I love to hear him talk. And I learned from him and have been looking forward to this lecture for some time. So Steve runs private practice. And Steve, I would ask that you talk a little bit about your practice and what it is you focus on. I'll let you do that rather than me misguide somebody on that. But he's one of the top therapists in Dallas. He's one of those people that I never have any qualms about referring to. And if you yourself are looking for a therapist in an area of his expertise, you could not find anybody better than Steve. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve, to tell us a little bit about your practice to start with.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it, Dina, both of you, for allowing me. I love being a part of this lecture series. It's always challenging for me. It gives me some momentum and some nudging to look into new fields, and gives me permission to really dig deep into areas of counseling and therapy that I love to do. So thank you so much for the opportunity. So like Daniel said, so I'm the founder and owner of Quest Counseling Center, and we're located in Allen, Texas, just a little bit north of Dallas. My primary area of focus is in the field of addiction. Like Daniel said, one of the things that Daniel was to help me with years ago was I worked in a residential facility for drug and alcohol abuse. So the primary focus of the practice is helping people who are dealing with substance use disorders, chemical use disorders. I also am a certified sex addiction therapist, so I deal with people who have problematic sexual behavior. I also help folks to determine a proper level of care as far as their addictive behaviors are concerned. I have some groups that I offer. So I do individual and group therapy. I also do some trainings about addiction. And it's just the love of my life. It's what I love doing. I think another thing that I enjoy doing, it's a part of my practice, is I do a lot of work with the LGBTQ community. This is a population that has some very specific needs and issues that they deal with that in some ways is quite different from what binary or heterosexual people have to deal with. So I do a lot of work in that area as well, trainings and with therapists about how to be more aware of the needs and competencies if you're going to be working in this particular area. So do a lot of that as well. So yeah, so it's really good to be here. And if that's okay, guys, I'll go ahead and get started.
Go for it.
Great.
Sure. Okay. All right.
Steve, do you want to ask that folks hold their questions and then we have
Yeah.
a Q&A at the end?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. That's exactly what I'd like for you guys to do, if you would just
And feel free to send us a question in the chat too, so we can read that to him at the end if you'd rather do it that way.
Well, first off, I just want to say thanks to Dina and Daniel for allowing me to have this opportunity to be with you guys. Like I said, it's always a joy to be a part of this lecture series, and it really does give me permission to do some reading and research in areas that I want to explore and learn more about myself. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the concept of mindfulness in relationships. So let's talk about mindfulness. So the first thing I want to share with you is that mindfulness is a way of living. It is a spiritual way of living. You know, in recovery, we talk about that addiction is a spiritual way of living just as much as the 12 steps or other self-helps are a spiritual way of living. But when we talk about the idea of mindfulness as a way of living, it's a way in which we understand to where we begin to let go of the things that, of our fears, our attachments to being in control, to being in charge, of being right, letting go of our expectations, our entitlements, and also any judgments that we may have of other people. Mindfulness is about being present in a loving, compassionate, non-judgmental way. And that's going to be the basis of when I begin to talk about what healthy relationships look like. That's one of the things that I think that's really important today, is to kind of get a feel for what a healthy relationship looks like. So mindfulness is about getting up and going. And what that means becoming actively involved. That means investing. That means initiating. That means connecting. One of the things that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, that all of us are wired to be in connection, that there are things that go on within our brains that require what we call mutual affect regulation. No one's an island. We are wired to be connected and to be in relationship with others. And mindfulness is a way in which we talk about becoming connected and entering into relationships and not isolating. The other part of that is that, but it's also about sitting and staying. And the best way that I can describe this to you for mindfulness is that, so think about when you're having a conversation with someone. If you've ever had a conversation with someone and you've noticed that they're just kind of not there. They may not be making eye contact with you, but you're aware that something else is going on. You know, a conversation and being mindfulness and sitting and staying means being fully present, means that your attention and your focus is on hearing and listening to the person across from you in a mindful way, which is a compassionate, non-judgmental way, and listening for what I call, or what authors call, listening with curiosity. It's one of my favorite phrases, and I don't know where I heard that, but I've really kind of adapted that. And I've realized that, when I've got somebody listening, can I be present, not preparing myself to answer or to talk, but simply listening to them and listening with curiosity to see and trying to discover this person who I have in front of me, and to be able to do that in a loving, non-judgmental, compassionate way. So it's about sitting and staying. It's about being present. One of the things that I know is that more than anything else in the world, I think what I find with people is they just want to be heard. It's interesting. I had, when I was doing graduate work and preparing to be a counselor, one of my professors said, Steve, if you'll be quiet long enough, your client's going to tell you everything that you need to know about them, because all they want to do is to be heard. And I think that's important. And there are lots of voices these days. And I think it's really important that we understand that mindfulness and healthy relationships is about allowing the other person to be heard and for us to be heard. And that's important. We cannot do that on our own. There are in the brain mirroring neurons to where we pay particular attention as I'm talking to you and I'm looking into your face and I'm looking for some kind of recognition in your facial expression that somehow you understand, that somehow, there's this connection there. And we just can't do that on our own. We require other people. It's back to that whole idea about how our brains are wired to be in connection with other people. That's who we are. We are created, again, to be connected. And the other thing I want to share with you is that the human heart, I love this phrase, holds much more love that can ever be dispersed in one lifetime. So when we talk about mindfulness and healthy relationships, we approach those healthy relationships not from scarcity, but from abundance, with the security and the knowledge and the knowing that there is love, and that there is more love that we can offer, that we can disperse in an entire lifetime. That's important. But really and truly, when we talk about relationship, it's about dancing. It's about a dance. It's about being connected with other people and learning how to communicate, learning how to listen, learning how to be heard. I can't tell you the number of things that I've seen in books or on the web about things like, four-sided conversations and active listening. And really and truly, we're wired to be in relationship. And it's a dance between two people or more than two people. We're all born with that capacity to dance with each other, to be in relationship with other. But the problem is that we don't always come with the necessary training. We sometimes don't know the steps to the dance. And that has to be taught. And I'll tell you where that starts. Where we learn about what it means to be in relationship, to be connected, is from the family in which we grew up in. They become the models for us about what it means to listen, what it means to speak, what it means to form relationships, what it means to be connected to other people. Now, think about the broad range of families and how there are some families that, emotions aren't a big part of that family system. So that affects the dance, that affects the steps. And sometimes how we grew up and what we experienced in our families growing up really kind of affects how well we dance, because that's really and truly where we learn the steps. That's really where this all begins. So before we talk about the dance, what is the dance? If I were to ask you, so here we are, this relationship, and why are we doing this? Why do we need to learn these steps? What's it about? Well, it's about intimacy. All of us, if we are going to survive, if we're going to live lives that have meaning and purpose and that are rich and full, has to involve in some way, shape, or form some level of intimacy. And there are different levels of intimacy. But healthy relationships are based on intimacy. So how do you create intimacy? Well, intimacy is about connection, and intimacy is created and happens when we are vulnerable and authentic with another human being. That's intimacy. So what I want to share with you is, just to kind of start off, before we get into some of the deeper things about healthy relationships, I want to talk a little bit about what types of intimacy we experience. And let me tell you how I talk about this. So I do a lot of work in people who have problematic sexual behavior, people who struggle with sex addiction or porn addiction. And sometimes as they begin to rebuild their lives, their partner or their spouse oftentimes experiences betrayal. And so intimacy is one of the things that they have to work on. Some guys, not all guys, but some guys, especially people who are struggling with problematic sexual behavior, really see sexual intimacy as the primary way in which they can be vulnerable or authentic. And one of the things that I tell some of my clients is, so for the time being, when this particular type of intimacy is kind of off the table as you guys begin to rebuild trust, one of the things that's important for you to begin to do is to begin to explore all the other ways that you experience intimacy with each other. And I said, I think that you'll find that you're experiencing intimacy in areas that you weren't really sure about, that you'll be surprised that there are other areas of intimacy that you are experiencing and just didn't know, never called it that. So I want to take just a minute, if you'll bear with me, just to kind of walk through this. So when we're talking about creative intimacy, there are, where did that go? Whoop, sorry. Okay. Give me a second, guys. Okay, here we go. All right. So when we talk about creating intimacy, these are the different ways in which we experience intimacy. There's aesthetic intimacy. There's affectional intimacy, emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, physical, social, sexual, and spiritual. So let's take a look at these. Let's talk about aesthetic intimacy first. So aesthetic intimacy is about sharing something that's beautiful together. So think about going for a walk in nature, in a park, together. You're experiencing the world around you and all of its wonder, and there's connection there. It could be visiting a museum together, maybe going to a concert, listening to the symphony together. It could be walking around in botanical gardens. It could be sitting on the front porch of your house or outside watching a lightning storm. So there's this aesthetic connection that we have with the universe, and that's one of the ways that we experience it. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had couples who've talked about this. I had one couple in particular who told me years ago that they live out in the country to where there's not a lot of city glow from the light. So they have a beautiful view of the night sky and the stars. And I remember them telling him that one evening he and his spouse were sitting out on the porch and they looked up into the sky and it was covered with stars, more than they could possibly count. And they felt connected. They talked about the experience that both of them were experiencing, that they were part of something larger than themselves together, that both of them felt a sense of connection and awe with one another. That's what we're talking about, that kind of aesthetic intimacy. Talking about, like I said, going to museums, those kinds of things, sharing something beautiful together. So affectional intimacy. So affectional intimacy can be anywhere from holding hands to giving someone a hug or giving someone a kiss, but it also can be offering compliments, sharing what we like about someone. You know, one of the things that I think it's interesting is that I had a client who told me one time that one of his favorite things to eat for breakfast was pancakes, and you know, his wife made him pancakes one time. And he told her afterwards, he said, you know, gosh, thank you so much. You really do a great job, and you know, making those pancakes, and they're delicious. And you know, it's just you're just the greatest. It's just so kind of you to do that for me. I appreciate that. And he thought about it a few days later, and he said that one of the things that he did was that he went back and he said to his wife, hey, you know, I just want you to know that that other day when you made the pancakes, I just got to tell you again how grateful I am, and what a great cook you are, and what a great person you are. So affectional intimacy, from holding hands as you walk to compliments, affirming a person. So emotional intimacy. So this is about sharing our feelings, talking about our feelings. This is kind of where vulnerability talks about, you know, sharing verbally fears and anxieties, crying and laughing with each other. Those are all important. They're sharing our emotions and our feelings with one another. Intellectual intimacy. Here again, you know, think about all the ways that we're talking about the way in which we're experiencing intimacy. And my hunch is that sometimes we forget that all these different ways of connecting with people intellectually, you know, this is more kind of a cognitive, cerebral kind of connection. It's conversations around intellectual things. It could be anywhere from education to politics, philosophy, religion. I have lots of couples who read books together and talk about them. This is another form of connecting with each other. Physical intimacy. Physical intimacy is about doing activities together. And that could be anywhere from hiking, doing chores around the house. You know, I tell you, one of the things that I was aware of was that I've had couples that have told me that, you know, they may be struggling in their relationship because of some kind of addictive behavior, and they really have a difficult time connecting with each other and experiencing intimacy with each other because of some of the hurt and pain that they experience. I had a couple tell me one time that one of the things that they did was they together they cleaned out the garage, took everything out of the garage, swept it, reorganized it, and they looked at each other and they felt connected. They looked at each other and they were doing something together and felt so good about it. That's physical intimacy. Like I said, it can be hiking or biking or all those things, but I think we miss that understanding that, you know, think about, you ever work out in the flower bed with your partner or with your spouse? That's a way to connect, doing things together. You know, it can be as simple as cleaning around the house. And this is where mindfulness comes in. So as you're kind of going around the house and you're cleaning the house together, to be mindful that, you know, this is something, a way that you're connecting with each other. I think that's so important. Social intimacy. So social intimacy can be doing activities together, maybe visiting with friends, going to dinner with friends. You know, and I had to put down here seeing a movie. Now, I got to be honest with you. The only way that I think, you know, social intimacy can be seeing a movie if it's somehow there's some kind of conversation afterwards, but it does count. Social intimacy, doing social things together. Maybe it's going to a rally. Maybe it's going to, you know, something like this, you know, some kind of discussion group. And of course, sexual intimacy. Exploring and sharing sexuality together, being sexual, genital, non-genital, fantasies, all those kinds of things are important ways in which we experience intimacy. And finally, spiritual intimacy. So spiritual intimacy is about Could be anything from meditating together. It could be maybe attending a faith community. Maybe it's meditating together. Maybe it's practicing contemplative prayer or contemplative meditation together. Again, a way of connecting. So if intimacy is the game, if healthy relationships are going to be involved with healthy intimacy, what I want to share with you, there are what we have called 5 A's, which become the foundation of intimacy that allow it to happen. So I want to talk about those. So the 5 A's is attention, acceptance, appreciation, affection, and allowing. So the first thing I want to say about the 5 A's is that where do we learn these? You know, we talked about that if relationships or healthy relationships is about the dance, these are the steps. And where do we learn the steps? Well, where we're supposed to learn them is in families, how we grow up. And, you know, all families are imperfect, but hopefully we have what we call these days kind of good enough parenting to where we can begin to experience and learn and express each one of these. So the 5 A's has to do with these 5 characteristics in which we are looking for as a part of what it means to be intimate, but also that we are able to give as well. So let's talk about those. So attention. You know, we talked about that one of the things that's so important in healthy relationships, and mindfulness helps us do that, is that there is this desire for each of us to be noticed, to be listened to be heard. You know, that's so crucial. And I think that more than anything else, I think like we've talked about earlier, this is something that people hunger for, to be listened to. We've all been at those crowds of people where we're having conversations and their eyes are glancing away from us, and, you know, and we're aware that they're not there, they're not present. So it's that desire to be listened to be in tune with someone, mirroring, going back to those mirroring neurons and where in which I'm looking into your face. And as you're listening to, I'm very aware that you're noticing me. I'm very aware that you're hearing me, that you're listening to me. And here again, I love the phrase, the desire for attention is not about an audience. It's not about an audience, but it's about a listener, someone who sits across from me and gets me. You know, I think that's one of the most powerful things about recovery groups, and one of the things that I think is true about the 12 steps. You know, as much as families who have someone that they love or a family member who may be a recovering alcoholic, that individual is only going to be able to be heard up to a certain point. But when they walk into a 12-step meeting, an AA meeting, people in that room get them, right? And I think that's another way about when we talk about attention, that what we're looking for someone who gets us. They may not have the same experiences with you, but somehow they get us, right? So attention, to be noticed, to listen to be able to see that we are connecting with other people. That is just very, very important. Acceptance, it's another important one. Acceptance means that we are received respectfully with all of our feeling, our choices, our personal trait, and we are supported. One of the things that we know is that if we don't get this in childhood, we might move out of that family feeling with inadequacy and shame. You know, if attention is about being heard and noticed, acceptance is about being embraced as worthy is good enough. Acceptance is that I accept you for all of who you are, for all of how you feel and your choices and all of those things. And we are deemed worthy. So we have attention and acceptance, which hopefully families can communicate and instill in us for us, so that we have the capacity to offer it to others as well. Affection. And here again, it's kind of what we talked about with affectional intimacy. It's not just about physical closeness, but feeling affectionate and feeling close to someone through conversation, from our presence. Affection can be expressed, like we said, through romantic gestures, kind words, thoughtful actions, playfulness. Think about somebody just, I have a strong affection for that person. Daily hugs, kisses, cuddling, words of affection, so that we are really committed to each other and that we're available for each other. So affection. And this is where I find some folks in the families that they grew up with, that for whatever reason, maybe this one was lacking in a family. And sometimes if we don't learn that, we find that difficult to share with other people. Appreciation. I think it's important that we all experience a sense of gratitude from others for who we are and the things that we do. Showing appreciation, for our own individual qualities, appreciating the differences that we experience with other people. So appreciation is important. And lastly, this is the one that I think is most interesting, allowing. So this is a characteristic which means that we allow someone to be themselves. People that if we're in a healthy relationship, that they are allowed to pursue their dreams and their own thought processes and develop their own ways of thinking, that they have the freedom to express themselves as individuals, to do things and think about things in their own way. It means that we don't try to control or manipulate that person to do and be what we want them to be. We simply allow them to be the people that they feel passionate to be. It's funny, I get tickled when, I used to talk with couples and they would say that, well, I don't really like that about him, but don't worry about that, I can change that. And I've always just, well, no, you can't. This is who he is. And you need to know that. And, families need to really instill a sense of allowing people to be who they are, every person in the family. That's so important because it gives us permission to explore and be ourselves. Now, let's talk about something that gets in the way of that. So if the 5 A's really and truly define what it means to be in a healthy relationship, all of those characteristics that we experience and that we learn, then there are what we call ego mindsets that really block it. They really get in the way of that. And so I wanted to spend some time just thinking about that. So what are ego mindsets? Well, ego mindsets are they're involuntary. I love the phrase, ego mindsets are like bullies that enter unbidden and they intrude. I love that. These mindsets just enter into our minds and they intrude on our ability to be present with people that we're with. They're disruptive. They distort what we see that's in front of us. They make it difficult for us to be fully present because those mindsets are going on. And believe it or not, there are 5, right? Fear is an ego mindset, desire, judgment, control, illusion. And some of these you've probably heard before, but that's kind of what these are. So let's talk about fear for a minute. If I'm in a mindset of fearfulness, I've got somebody in front of me and I'm experiencing some fear. It may be that I have some fear and worry about a situation or a person that I'm with. And I may fear or worry about, and that could be anything, fill in the blank, whether or not they're going to find me good enough, whether or not I'm going to be able to articulate. So I'm fearful. All these fears are kind of running through my mind. And so what happens is I immediately become defensive, right? My guard is up. So guess what happens? If I'm in that mindset, I'm not going to be able to be present in a non-judgmental, loving way. It's going to interrupt and disrupt me being mindful of the person who's right in front of me. Fear. A desire, that's interesting, right? So in this particular moment, as I'm in this particular ego mindset, I have a desire that somehow this person is going to meet my needs, that somehow I have an expectation for this person, and that I'm trying to get something from you, right? And so maybe that's your approval. Maybe that's affirmation. Maybe that's your acceptance. But as long as I'm in that mindset, here again, we're back to it. It's going to interfere with intimacy. It's going to interfere with our being able to be connected with one another. I will not be able to be present. Like I said, over and over again, I think what people are looking for in healthy relationships is the capacity for us to be present, fully present with another human being. So judgment. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you're having a conversation and you find yourself jumping to judgment about the individual that you're listening to. Now, some people think about being judgmental, then they be critical. It might be a criticism of the person, or it may be negative. It may be, due to some moral belief that we have, but it can also be admiration. It can be humor. It can be positive or negative. And basically, when we are judging, when you're in that mindset, I'm really caught up in my own opinion, which blocks and interferes with me seeing you as you really are. And that's important. Again, not only do we want to be heard and listened to, but we want to be deemed worthy for who we are. And when we're in judgment, that's not going to be possible. Control. So basically, you know how you have those people and they're listening to you and you can already see they're formulating a plan, that we have a particular way in which we want this encounter to go. We're tied up in the outcome, caught up in the need to convince you, persuade you about whatever you're saying, to advise or change you. That somehow we're focusing on our point of view rather than the person who's sitting there in front of us, hoping that we will hear them. Control. And the last one's illusion, which is interesting, I think. Illusion can occur as denial, that we may have somebody who is struggling and we can't see it. We may project our own goodness or our own badness onto someone else. We may have that this is going to be the person who is going to be able to solve my problems. And so we create this idealization of them, or we may depreciate them. So I have a belief about you as I sit here listening. And as long as I'm in that particular mindset, that I have this belief, one, I'm realizing that it's difficult for me to really see you for what you're really like. It obscures my view. And that's difficult. And that's a struggle. So one of the things I want to say is that the 5 A's come to others, and the 5 mindsets come at someone. So coming to, coming at. So there's that kind of mindsets are often aggressive. They're bullies about having our own ideas and thoughts and beliefs and processes. So I think that that's important for us to understand, that the 5 A's, as we come to others, we come to them, meeting them. There's an old story that's been around. It's an old Hasidic tale about a conflict between a father and his son. And the son comes to the father and says, I just can't stay here any longer. And so he leaves. And months and years go by, and the father sends messengers, please come home. Please come home. And the son says, I can't. And this happens several times until finally the messenger comes to the son and says, your father bids you to come home. And the son says, I cannot. And then the messenger says, then your father says, come as far as you can, and I will come the rest of the way. So there's that coming to people that we learn so much about as far as with the 5 A's. I'd really invite you to kind of begin to think about, those 5 A's, and think about your own family. Think about your own growing up. It's not an indictment on family, but I'm wondering, if you were to score your own family that you grew up in, how would that be? How would that be? So something to think about. So finally, here's what I want to say. This is a wonderful quote from Martin Buber, and he says, a person wishes to be confirmed in his being by another person. I love the word secretly and bashfully. He watches for a yes, which allows him to be, and which can come to her or him only from one human being to another. It is from one human being to another that heavenly bread of self-being is passed. Healthy relationships are about confirming each other. The 5 A's are the ways in which we confirm one another in healthy relationships. And like I said, and sometimes with families, we may get some of that, we may not. But when I think about healthy relationships, here's a good set of criteria that I think that can help us, and mindfulness can help us as well. So I'm curious, questions, comments about this?
Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask Steve a question, or if you have a comment.
Good evening, Steve. My name is Marlene. I'm an LPC, recently became fully licensed. And I wanted you to speak maybe just a little bit more about family background, your upbringing dynamics as it relates to the 5 A's.
Sure. So what I would share with you is that, it is the primary responsibility of families of origin, the families that we grew up in, to make sure that we experience all of these characteristics, so that we get a template of what a healthy relationship looks like. And so, and there are a couple of things. So let's say, for instance, that you have in a particular family that maybe they're not the most affectionate family. So there's not a lot of affection or affirmation. You know, I was working with a guy one time, and he said, you know, my dad never really ever compliments me. He never lets me know that I'm doing a good job, or he appreciates me for who I am. And I said, well, did you ever ask your dad about that? And he said, well, no. And I said, well, why don't you do that? And so we asked him, and here's what the dad said. Well, I figured, you know, as long as you were doing good, you knew that. You know, I'm only going to bother you and tell you when you're doing something wrong. You know, I figured if you're doing good, you know that. So here's that different perspective, right? That need to be deemed worthy. And the dad operates it, well, as long as, you know, I'm off your back, you must know you're doing something right, right? So I think that's when we talk about how that's so important. And like I said, no family is perfect. Some families do a better job of this than others. And the term that we talk about is that hopefully we all grow up and have good enough families. But, you know, if we don't understand affirmations and how important it is to be affirmed, if we don't understand how important it is to pay attention to someone, you know, we talk a lot about in family systems about that lost child, right? Maybe the parents are all wrapped up in, you know, a particular child that has special needs, and the child gets lost. So sometimes that can be problematic as far as learning and understanding what those 5 A's, getting those 5 A's transmitted. Now, it also doesn't mean that not later on in relationships that we can experience that on our own, but really and truly, you know, that's one of the primary responsibilities of healthy families, is to make sure that those are instilled, that we know the steps, because that's what determines healthy relationships. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. Very informative. Thank you, Steve.
Steve, in your own personal journey around compassion and meditation to move to a place of compassion with others, what do you think is the biggest, where'd you get the most traction? What was most useful for you in your journey?
Tell that to me one more time.
Where'd you get the most traction? How'd you become the most peaceful you, the best you? What was most important in your own journey? And as you challenge us to engage this, to move to a more compassionate place in an intimate way with others, what was most impactful to you in your journey?
I think probably one of the things that has been the most impactful is learning and understanding how important it is for me to have these moments of quietness, to step back. You know, Richard Foster has been around for I don't know how long, and he talks about spiritual disciplines, and he says that muchness, noisiness, manyness are things that get in the way of us being fully present with ourselves and with one another. One of the things I know about me is that, so if any of you know anything about the Enneagram, so I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, so I'm always going and reframing and doing all kinds of stuff. And I realize how sometimes for me that less is more. What's gotten the most traction for me is when I have some kind of consistent daily practice in which I step back and reflect and just think and ponder. because in that moment I can get centered. And I do that lots of ways. I do contemplative prayer, sitting in silence, those kinds of things. One of the things that I do kind of on the far side of this is that usually once or twice a year, I go up to a monastery in Subiaco, Arkansas. It's a Benedictine monastery. And I'm on a 7-day silent retreat where I don't speak for 7 days. Now I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, okay? We are talkers, okay? But there is something about that that centers me and allows me to be present to myself. And when I can do that, one of the things that I find is I can be present to other people. Now, you don't have to go on a 7-day silent retreat. That's great. I'd love for you to do it. But if you can have a daily practice where you just have a moment to have some reading, something that just kind of grounds you and centers you, I think that's when the most traction, because it sets my day. I'll tell you right now, one of the things that I do, and I'm working with clients who are in recovery, the 12 steps have a thing called Upon Awakening, and it focuses your day about what you're going to do. And it bookends at the end of the day before retiring, where you reflect upon, how did I do today? How did I do today? Journaling, all these ways are ways in which we can find and center ourselves that allows us to be present, to be mindful when we're sitting with someone. I think also too, one of the things that, I used to do when I would go home and I would pull into the garage and I would simply grab the steering wheel and I would just take a pause and remind myself, I'm home. And there are people in that house that I need to pay attention to. And just take that moment. Maybe it's 30 seconds, but it's that grounding. And the same thing when I leave every day. Here's my day. I have people who I'm going to be seeing, and I need to be grounded in here and to listen to them. So that's what works for me.
Other questions or comments for Steve? Don't be bashful. He loves to talk.
Daniel, can you hear me?
Yes.
Daniel, this is Craig. I was wanting to say something to Steve. When you talk about the Enneagram, I'm an 8. So with that being a challenger, I find that in my life, day to day, for the past 25 years in business, that I did both. I was providing the 5 A's to family and employees, and at the same time, I had the 5 mindsets. And that sounds a lot like an 8. He's 1 minute giving build up, and the next minute he's probably tearing down. And as I'm trying to correct that in my retirement years, you said something about journaling. Daniel taught me about journaling. What's some other things to work with that, with working with the 5 A's of giving and trying to unload the mindset parts? Did I say that right? Did that come across okay?
Yeah. That's a really great question. So the first thing is to understand that the mindsets are bullies, okay? And that they're intrusive, and sometimes we have very little control over that. And the more that we are aware of those mindsets and understanding that when we are in that mindset, whatever those are, whichever one it is, that it prevents us from being present. It's just, we're just not going to be able to be there. And so, here again, simply being aware of that, none of us ever reaches a point to where we don't ever have to worry about those, that somehow the mindsets aren't there. They are always there. But the first thing is to be able to recognize them, and once you recognize them, then, there are lots of actions that you can take. And so usually with a mindset, you can do the opposite, right? And just engage in the opposite. You know how we talk about somebody, if you're in an argument with somebody and they're raising their voice, that what we're supposed to do is speak softly, right? And so thinking about that as it relates to the mindsets, if we find yourself in the mindset of being in control, right? Because eights don't really want to be in control. That's a joke. But anyway, the opposite of that is surrender and letting go. So I think, you look to because really and truly you can match each one of those mindsets to the 5 A's, and you simply bring in that one that's missing. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you.
Steve, just a huge thank you for this. I always am, I love this information. You had mentioned it in another meeting that you and I were at, and I was intrigued by it. So I was really glad that you went into the details about this. And I so appreciate the cadence of your voice. It's very, very rhythmic to me. And I felt myself really calming down as I listened to you. And I noticed how far off my center I was. So I want to thank you for that. And then I get really anxious when I hear you saying, well, I do this and I practice this and I do this and I go to a 7-day silent retreat. Just put a knife in my eye, then put me in a retreat for 7 days where I can't speak. So, but what came up for me that I just wanted to offer is that for folks that might be feeling the same way as me, is that one way that I can step into this place of intentionality and mindfulness is through the gates of curiosity. That if I can just shift into curiosity, whether that be about the language that's going on in my head or the sensations in my body, whether it's constricted or loose or vibrating, I can be curious about that and I leave that bully mindset. I love that expression, the bully mindset, because I'm beating up on myself typically and you when I'm in that. And they're involuntary and they're universal. The mindsets are universal. There's not a culture who doesn't experience this, And I don't know, you guys may know, was it Pia who said, to listen with curiosity? Somehow, I think so. Yeah.
And that has stuck with me. And I just so believe that is such an important part of mindfulness, that to be able to kind of step back and just listen with curiosity, to be detached, to have no, preconceived notions about, to just listen with curiosity. It's my favorite phrase.
And her other phrase, listen to learn.
Yeah,
which keeps
absolutely.
me in curiosity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Steve, my name is Bill. I have a question, really just a curious question. Have you ever practiced yoga?
I never have. And
you have the language of it.
Yeah, and I have, I just never got around to that, and what's funny is, so, back in the day, I used to think about yoga and me and having to put my leg behind my neck, but now I'm learning there's so much more. I have a lot of clients who do yoga. So I've never done that. I've never done that.
Oh, okay. And I was just thank you for the concept of doing the opposite. That could be a great practice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So one thing I'd like to say to everybody out there, if you want to review this again, we will have it up on our website. You can access this again. Or if you have friends, neighbors, relatives who that you think might enjoy this presentation, we'll have it up on our site where you can access it and see it again. It's really good stuff. Anybody else with a comment or a question for Steve? Well, again, I put in the presentation, if you'll just reach out to us at D2 Counseling with an email, we can get you CEUs for this event tonight. And would like to, Dina referenced earlier, the lecture series will go back to being in live and on Facebook Live. I believe it is. We will have a at-home option. And our next one, we skipped December because of the holidays. And our next meeting will be January 17th of 2022. It's always the third Tuesday of the month, which would make it the 18th. Now I've confused everybody, but it shows to be the third Tuesday of the month, which would be the 18th of January. And we'd like to see all of y'all there. Feel free to join us at Unity Church there on Forest Lane between Hillcrest and Preston. And we'll also have links sent out if you'd like to attend online as well. Steve, is there anything else that you meant to mention and haven't, or anything else?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. This presentation is a little bit briefer than I thought it was going to be, but I thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share with you. It's always great. I love talking about this stuff. Yeah,
well, it was just right as far as the length goes. So thank you very much. In the comments in the chat, everybody's very complimentary, and we thank you again for your time. Dina,
Sure.
Anything else tonight?
No, just a huge thank you to Steve, and thank you all for participating. We'll see you. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year.
Be well, everyone. Take care.